Hello, my name is Devereux, and you are watching New Kingdom Media. This is going to be the first of a live stream series called Forgotten Christianity, where I'm going to be looking at some of the central teachings of the New Testament and the early church fathers that have been forgotten, ignored, and rejected by contemporary Christians today. And that I think it is at the very least interesting for us to talk about what those are, and also important for us to look at, what Jesus, the apostles, and the early church actually taught, especially the ones that we ignore today. So in this first episode, we are going to be looking at the fact that the early church, that includes Jesus, the apostles, and the church fathers, were socialists. We're going to look, first of all, that they were socialist. I'll be arguing that they were, looking through the fathers and the New Testament. We're then going to look at why they were socialists, which is very important. Why were they socialists? It's not like their socialist beliefs or teachings was just some random thing that has nothing to do with their other beliefs. It flowed out of a lot of their other core beliefs, some of which have also been forgotten by contemporary Christians, like the flesh versus spirit dichotomy, which we'll be looking at next week. So we'll look at why they were socialists. And then finally, at the end, we are going to look at some practical ways about how we can follow their teachings today. Okay, so that they were socialists, why they were socialists, and how we can follow their teachings today. That's what we're going to be doing today. This is a live streamed video, so if you have any comments, any questions, any challenges, put them in the live comments and I will respond to them. Also, please be sure to like this video and subscribe to this channel and click the bell so you can always be notified if I have a video coming up. Before we get into it, I'm going to give a little preamble here about why is it that the vast majority of conservative Christians don't believe that the New Testament teaches anything like socialism. Why is it the vast majority of conservative Christians even think that the New Testament is somehow like anti-socialist or something? And why is it that many conservative Christians would probably see this video as evidence that I myself have gone liberal, that I've become a leftist, I've switched sides, or I'm no longer a conservative? Why is that? I think it's all because of the same thing, which is that for most Christians, and no one wants to believe this is true about themselves, but it is true of most Christians, probably the vast majority of Christians, religion is downstream of politics, or theology is downstream of politics. And what I mean by that is your theological beliefs, your religious beliefs, are actually more impacted by your political beliefs than the other way around. Okay, and that's why it is that liberal Christians across the board agree with the left-wing political parties of Western nations. So whether it's the Democratic Party in the States or the Labour Party in places like New Zealand and England, we have the Labour Party, which is like our left-wing party. Or whether it's right-wing people who are Republican and who are, in New Zealand, they'd vote National or whatever it is. Why is it that if you're a left-wing Christian or a liberal Christian, it just so happens that you're really pro-Ukraine? Like Ukraine. That sure. You got that straight from the New Testament, did you? Supporting Ukraine in this actually very complicated international conflict. Why is it that they just so happen to all be pro-Ukraine? They all have their little Ukrainian flag outside their liberal church. Yeah, they're all pro-social welfare. Why is it that they just so happen to all be pro-abortion? Why is it they just so happen to all be pro-mass immigration? Why is it they just so happen to all be pro-Palestine? Why is it that they just so happen to all be in favor of the government's overreach during the COVID-19 pandemic? Why is it they just so happen to all be feminists? Why is it they just so happen to all be about environmental stuff and stopping climate change and blah, blah, blah? It's across the board. Whatever the Democratic Party is, a liberal Christian will tick all of those boxes, okay? Now, by the way, I agree with some of those things that I just mentioned. I'm not trying to bag all of those. It's the same thing, though, with right-wing or sorry, conservative Christians. Why is it that conservative Christians just so happen to, across the board, agree with the Republican Party's talking points or central beliefs? Why is it that conservative Christians, so this is a Christian who ostensibly is someone who follows the Bible and takes the Bible seriously, right? They're all pro-gun? Okay, I'm not saying I'm not pro-gun, by the way, but I'm not saying that it's inconceivable that a Christian could be pro-gun, but it's like, you got that from the Bible, did you? No, you didn't. You got it from your party line. So conservative Christians are just across the board. They're pro-gun. They're pro-free market. Okay, yeah. The Bible's in favor of free market capitalism. Sure, they're in favor of closed borders. They're all anti-abortion. Yeah, again, some of those things I obviously agree with, but they're all pro-Israel. Well, not all these days, but it used to be, right? A conservative Christian in America, oh yeah, you bet they're pro-Israel, right? It's just that the point is they're all aligned with the party of their choice, and so religion, theology is downstream of politics. That's how it always has been. All right. And it's a tribal thing. You know, if you're going to be on this side and this team, then you need to tick all these boxes. And if you're going to be on this team, you need to tick all of those boxes. Okay. And so that's why when I've made posts about how, for instance, I'm opposed to what the state of Israel is doing in Gaza, which has been described as a genocide by a number of NGOs and international bodies and by the UN and all these people. But I'm sure they're all, paid by Hamas, right? Yeah. Sure, Hamas. Hamas controls the UN, yeah, or something like that. Anyway, when I came out saying that I'm anti the idea of tens of thousands of children being massacred by the state of Israel, a lot of people go, "Oh, you're a lefty now. You've become a liberal." Like, how does that have anything to do with being left wing? Like, how does being opposed to genocide make you a liberal? Like, oh, you're a liberal. No, I'm a human being who isn't crazy. And when the UN and when Israeli organizations and NGOs and blah blah, and when what I'm seeing with my own two eyes on social media, all these videos and whatnot, when I'm seeing that, I'm saying that's not cool. That's actually really bad. I'm not saying that because I'm a liberal or I'm a lefty. I'm just saying it because it's the truth. Okay, it's just back to the pro-gun thing. At the very least, you'd have to agree that the Bible doesn't give you anywhere near as much information or teaching as you would need to definitively be 100% on that issue. Whether you're pro the Second Amendment or you're anti it, whether you think that it's okay for a civilian to have 100 AR-15s in their house, or whether you think that if you have anything more than a hunting rifle or a, double-barreled shotgun, that you have to have a license and you have to have it in a cabinet and you have to have mental health checks and be on a system, a database somewhere, blah, blah. Whatever you think about that, you have to agree. The Bible does not give you enough teaching or evidence to be 100% on level one. It just doesn't. That's just the reality of it, okay? But why does it just so happen that every conservative Christian basically in America is pro-gun? So all of these guys, right? They all just so happen to read the Bible and somehow come to the determination that Jesus is pro-gun or something. No, they believe it because it's their party, it's their team, it's their Republican, their team red, and we're pro-gun, and that's what we do. And so their theology is going to have to adapt to their politics, and they're going to try and come up with some way that Jesus actually endorsed that view or something. It's all about politics, okay? And that's why it is that you've got liberal Christians who support politicians who are atheists, who hate Christianity, who are evil people. Like they're like pro, mass abortion up to like the 9th month or something, and you got like liberal Christians support these. Like no, or vice versa on the right. How like it is not conceivable, if we're being really honest, it's not conceivable how a devout Christian could look at someone like Donald Trump as some kind of like bastion of morality, like the savior figure. He's going to save America or the West. The guy is irrefutably an immoral person. I mean, he's a serial adulterer. He had an affair with a porn star. He's had like multiple marriages. He's the definition of like a materialist. He has like these golden towers of his name on them. Like everything the New Testament has to say about rich people, wealth, materialism. Like this guy is like a stereotypical example of that sort of thing. He like refuses to acknowledge he's ever made a mistake. He's even said in an interview like he doesn't ask God for forgiveness. And you have all these conservative Christians be like, we love Trump. He's a Christian leader. Guys, that's insane. That's insane. And the thing is, what's going on here is they're not going to stick to their guns when it comes to theology. They're not going to say, my theology means that I'm going to have to not support a Republican president for 2 terms. They would never do that. They would never do that because theology is downstream of politics. So they would much, much sooner adapt and change and modify their theology to accommodate them having to support who happens to be the Republican president at that time, than stick with the theology and say, I'm not going to vote Republican this time, or I'm going to be opposed to the Republican Party while he leads it. Right? Politics is downstream. Theology is downstream of politics. And that's the same thing with the socialist issue. That is why, even though the New Testament virtually explicitly teaches and what would come to be socialism, people don't see it there, and they seem to have this opinion that Jesus is walking around Galilee like he's some kind of free market Thomas Sowell capitalist. He's like going up to the poor and being like, you just need to work harder, all right? If you worked harder, you wouldn't be in this situation. And we need rich people. We need billionaires and millionaires for the economy. I want the rich to get richer. It's called trickle-down economics. So if you have these billionaires, we're going to see that money trickle down. We're going to see the money trickle down. And if you're poor, you need to work harder. You just need to work hard. Is Jesus doing that? No, he's not doing that. He's very clearly a socialist figure. That's anachronistic, of course. The term hadn't existed at that time, but what would come to be socialism is what he's teaching. But they don't see it. They don't see it there because they don't want to see it there, because that goes against their team. Their team is, we're a conservative Christian. We're pro-capitalism. Right? And so they're not going to do that. They're just not going to do that. Right? And that's also why those sorts of people are going to see me making a video saying that Jesus was a socialist and go, he's become a liberal. He's a liberal now. He's not a conservative anymore. He's not a... Okay, how about this? This is crazy to think about. I know it's very hard to imagine such a thing happening. What if I think the New Testament and the Church Fathers taught socialism because I actually think they did? Like, I read it and I actually thought they did because they do. Rather than I decided one day to become a lefty or a liberal and ditch conservative Christianity, and now I'm gonna go, oh well, now the New Testament teaches socialism. What if it's actually not the case? All right, I don't want to be one of these guys who's like this team player who's like, oh, I'm just going to believe, I'm going to tick all these boxes. So because I'm a conservative Christian and an Anglican, that's it. I have to believe in this and 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 this. No. I don't want to be like that. I want to follow Jesus. and I want to read the New Testament, and I want to read the fathers and actually see what they're really saying. I mean, the same thing happens with the church fathers. All right. All these Roman Catholics, they're like, the church fathers, they all believed in the Vatican I papacy. Yeah, did they? Yeah, they, right. Yeah, sure. And they all believed in, the intercession of the saints and praying to images. Oh yeah, they did they? Like the Apostolic Fathers, they were all doing that. Right? Like the East Orthodox do the same thing. Like, oh, they all, and then even Protestants. You've even got like you got like Calvinists be like, the early church fathers were Calvinists. Like, okay, buddy. Right, yeah. No, like it's just, how about we just read them and just see what they said, and just be honest about what they taught, and you'll find that a lot of them taught things that will make you very uncomfortable. A lot of them taught things that make me uncomfortable. Okay, and we might wish or prefer they hadn't said that, but they did say it. We might wish they didn't believe that, but they did believe that. Let's just be real about it. And this is the thing. I don't want to be going on about this preamble for too much longer, but you got to understand there's a little bit of a difference between pop Christianity and YouTube Christianity, which is pop Christianity. This whole apologetics silly, racket. We've got like Roman Catholics who just, Roman Catholic YouTubers who are like, all the early church fathers were Roman Catholics who would have believed in Vatican I. And you have Eastern Orthodox guys who are like, oh, the early church fathers. And you got Calvinists who are even like, the early church fathers are all Calvinists. Like a Calvinist thinks that the early church, like at the Council of Nicaea, they were all wearing like suit and ties. They all had a suit and tie. And they, right. So this is the YouTube bracket, but you gotta understand when you get to scholarship, actual biblical scholarship or early church scholarship, like the actual scholars of these matters who are respected authorities. And this is the thing, because in this YouTube pop world, there's this very anti-scholarship thing that's going on where there's this real rejection of scholarship or academia and that kind of thing. And I agree with a lot of that, because a lot of it is this ivory tower elitist thing, and there's like an in-group and stuff, and you have to play this sort of game in order to get into it. I do understand that. But there's another thing where you do read them, you read scholars and academics, and they are the sort of people who are just like, yeah, no, that guy did not teach that. He obviously taught this. Like, look at it. They're much more honest about it. And I do find that in scholarship, people are pretty just straight up like, yeah, the church fathers were socialists, yes, all right, or if not communists, and they're not trying to play this game of like pretending that all of these guys, believed your preconceived notions or taught it or something stupid like that. Okay, so it's just better to be honest. What does the New Testament say? What do the fathers say? Let's just be honest about it, okay? And there's something scary about that. I acknowledge it. There's something scary about not having the security and the safety of being in a team where it's like, okay, I'm just going to already assume as a preconceived notion, I'm going to presuppose that Jesus taught all of these things because that's what my team says. There's something scary about saying, what did he actually say? And you have to do the work yourself. And you have to be prepared to be uncomfortable because maybe he taught something that goes against a core belief of yours or something like that. But that's kind of like what you got to do. Or you're just a sheep. You're just a drone part of this team. And, ultimately it's not faithfulness to Christ. It's really just faithfulness to your team. And your team just so happens to say Christ is king or something. And so you believe in Jesus for that reason or whatever. I'm not saying everyone is like that, but there's, there are a lot of people who are like that. Okay. So yeah, that's that kind of preamble out the way. Now let's get into the video. So first we need to define what socialism is, right? And that kind of thing, because people often assume when they hear socialism, they think USSR, they think Soviet Union policy, or they think Marxism or Marxist Leninism. Right. I think there was one video that I saw. I won't say who it was because I don't want to like start any beef or anything. But there's this video on YouTube by a Roman Catholic YouTuber, and he he's got this video where he's trying to debunk the idea that the New Testament teaches socialism. It's like the worst thing I've ever seen in my life. It's so bad. It's like terrible, man. Oh gosh, I can't describe how cringe the video is, but his like some of his arguments are actually truly terrible. It's like he goes, well, the New Testament lived communally. If that makes them a socialism, then you may as well say that they were wolves too, like because wolves have packs. Like, were they wolves? Like, okay, but his like main argument is he's basically just saying that the New Testament wasn't Marxist. Like, okay, but that's not, socialism doesn't have to mean Marxism. Anyway, let's just be real about these definitions. So if you look at the definition that Britannica gives you, Britannica says this, quote, socialism is a social and economic doctrine that calls for public rather than private ownership or control of property and natural resources. We'll find that this is what the Church Fathers in the New Testament taught. According to the socialist view, and when I say public, I don't mean by the state, but it is a communal ownership of property rather than private ownership by an individual. Okay. According to the socialist view, individuals do not live or work in isolation, but live in cooperation with one another. That is irrefutably the New Testament's teaching and the early Church Fathers' teaching. Furthermore, everything that people produce is in some sense a social product, and everyone who contributes to the production of a good is entitled to a share in it, once again irrefutably taught by the New Testament and Church Fathers. Back to the quote, society as a whole, therefore, should own or at least control property for the benefit of all its members. Once again, we will see that that is irrefutably taught in the New Testament. Okay, so that's Britannica. Notice how it's not defining socialism as saying that it's a one-party dictatorship state that controls everything and forces Marxism on people. That is not the definition that Britannica gives. Okay, socialism is much broader than Marxism. It's much broader than the USSR's policies. Okay, it's a movement and an ideology that predates all that stuff. Now, if you look at the definition that Merriam-Webster gives, it gives two definitions. The first one is, quote, socialism is any of various egalitarian economic and political theories or movements, so it doesn't have to be political, could just be a social movement, advocating collective or governmental ownership. So it doesn't have to be governmental ownership, collective or governmental ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. Okay, so socialism can just be the collective ownership and administration of the means of production and distribution of goods. This is what we find in the New Testament. And the second definition, a system of society or group living in which there is no private property. All right, again, we'll see this be taught. So based on the definitions given by Merriam-Webster and Britannica, yes, the New Testament Church Fathers fall squarely under those definitions. It's worth noting that some of the earliest socialist thinkers believed in socialist societies or cooperatives or communal associations that were essentially a voluntary organization where people of their free will agreed to join in this cooperative and share resources and have a collective ownership of the means of production, rather than advocating for some kind of state system where it's a forced socialism upon the whole populace by a dictatorship. Right? A lot of the earliest socialists didn't teach that kind of thing. They taught what the New Testament teach, and they are known as socialist thinkers. We're talking about people like Etienne Cabet, Charles Fourier, I think is the way you say that, Fourier, and Robert Owen. Right, these are early socialist thinkers who had that view. And then as for Christian socialists, you've got one of my heroes, F.D. Morris. He's one of the pioneers of what's called Christian socialism in the mid-19th century. And in 1848, he became one of the leaders of this movement, the Christian socialist movement. And he said, quote, Christianity is the only foundation of socialism, and a true socialism is the necessary result of a sound Christianity. Now, when F.D. Morris is talking about socialism, when he says that socialism is the necessary result of a sound Christianity, he's talking about a voluntarist socialism run by communities, by cooperatives. He's not advocating for the USSR. He's not advocating for a Marxist-Leninism or Stalinism, okay? And it's worth noting that he said that the same year that the Communist Manifesto was published. All right, so this is just, when I say socialist, I'm not talking about the USSR. I'm not talking about Pol Pot's Cambodia. I'm not talking about North Korea, right? Socialism is a much broader definition than that. Those people think they are falling under the socialist umbrella, and in some senses they did strive to. And of course, they almost always made catastrophic errors and things ended terribly. But socialism doesn't have to be like that. It doesn't have to be a dictatorship, one-party state, sort of thing. So with those definitions out of the way, what I want to do now is prove that the New Testament and the Church Fathers taught socialism. We're going to do it in a little bit of a different order. We're going to look first at the book of Acts, then we're going to look at the Church Fathers, then we'll move to the Gospels and the book of James. Once that's established, we are then going to look at why there were socialists, which is very important. And then once we've established that, we'll look at how we can apply these things practically today. I'm not saying let's have a revolt and establish a socialist dictatorship. No, just how can you actually just do this in your real life? All right, before I move in, I've got some comments. I just want to look at some of them. Someone said, if I don't catch the stream, I would like to know if you looked into the Christian socialist movement of the 19th century. Wow, that's funny. I just mentioned that. Anglicans like Reverend Charles Kingsley have really helped me with the topic. Yeah, I have not read any of him, but I like F.D. Morris. Someone says, I'm sure you know that George MacDonald moved in socialist circles. He was friends with Morris. Lewis Carroll, I think, was a socialist, and there are some other big names he was in with. That is correct. He attended the Church of F.D. Morris, who was also a universalist and a socialist. So yeah, he was in that kind of sphere. Yeah. Someone says Acts 2:44, brah. Well, yeah, that will definitely be coming up. Someone said, isn't that the point of both creeds and confessions? I don't know what he's referring to there. Probably my preamble. I don't know what he's trying to say. Ayn Rand was an atheist who hated Christianity. Therefore, we can claim that all capitalists are atheists. That's the logic of the people who associate all forms of socialism with Marx. Correct. The other Paul. Hey, Paul. Paul's here. Paul's in the house. This is going to be fun. Paul, I don't know if we've ever talked about economics. Have we? I don't know. In your based Christian nationalist utopia, what are they all going to be? Free market capitalists? I don't know. Anyway, he says real socialism has never been tried. He says he's joking. Yeah, it's a joke, so I shouldn't take what you said too seriously. But that's not what I wasn't saying that. I was just saying socialism is a very wide umbrella, and so it doesn't have to be like socialism doesn't have to be what they're doing. But what they're doing was an honest attempt, I think, at socialism in some cases, although it was wrong. It was a different type. It was a different interpretation of the wider socialist umbrella, and a catastrophic one. Someone said, perhaps you should address Article 38 at the end of your presentation. Which part are you referring to? Article 38. Let's look at it now. Are you going to crucify me that I can't remember Article 38 off by heart? There we go. Article 38. The title is of Christian men's goods, which are not common. The riches and goods of Christians are not common, as touching the right, title, and possession of the same, as certain Anabaptists do falsely boast. Notwithstanding, every man ought of such things as he possesseth liberally give alms to the poor, according to his ability. Okay, great. No problem there. They're saying you give your goods freely of your own volition, not by force. Okay, so they're your goods, but you should be giving them to people. And then it says they should be given to the poor liberally according to his ability. That's one half of the standard Marxist slogan already there. Now, I would actually go a little bit further. I would admit the article does seem to implicitly teach private property, maybe which I do think is rejected by the New Testament. But we need to distinguish personal property and private property. We're about to get into that distinction. But yeah, anyway, even if I did disagree somewhat with this rather, obscure article at the very end, who cares, man? Like, come on, dude. Okay, so we're going to start off with Acts chapter 2 and then chapter 4. I think people who are in the know are going to know what this is all about. Let's just quote it. So Acts chapter 2 from verse 44 saith, "And all who believed were together and had all things in common." They had all things in common. Oh, we're off to a socialist start here. They had all things in common, did they? Okay, so hold on a minute. What did that article say again? Of Christians' men's goods, which are not common, the Bible, and they had all things in common. Okay, so there is a little bit of an issue here. If we interpret the article under a certain way, maybe it can fit. But look, guys, we gotta go with the Bible over everything. Okay, we can't force the Bible to fit with some article that was written in like the 16th century. Okay, you just have to stick with the Bible. Now, I think you could interpret that article to still fit with everything I'm about to say, so long as you think it refers to personal property rather than what we might call private property. But yeah, that might be pushing it. Okay. And in any case, even if you were to say the article does say that that private property is real and you have the right to private property, you could still make that work in a sense that you must freely give up your wealth and the means of production of your own volition according to your ability, rather than it be forced upon you, which I absolutely don't believe should happen. And I don't believe it's what the New Testament or the fathers teach. In fact, we're going to find out later on that John Chrysostom explicitly taught against a forcible relinquishing of goods, someone giving up their wealth or whatever by force. We don't believe in that. And that might be what the article is getting at. In any case, if the article is just saying no, and it's just contradicting anything mildly socialist here, then the article might very well be wrong. It's not a big deal. All right, I've said enough about the article. Let's just move on and I'll get back to it. I'm so tempted by these comments. I'll quickly read these comments. Someone says, Pope Benedict the 16th said that democratic socialism was and is close to Catholic social doctrine. Yeah. I believe he also praised the Nordic model of social democracy in Scandinavian countries. Yes, I like that guy. God rest his soul. The other Paul said, ha 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 ha, I don't think we have talked economics, but I'm very much anti-capitalism. Based. I'm partial to a more guild-based corporatist economics. Corporatist. Yikes. I think I know what he's saying there. Nah, that's cool, man. Anything's better than being capitalist. Someone said Anglican L. I suppose he's referring to the article. Article 38 clearly articulates private property as a fundamental right. Okay. Someone goes, it's interesting that Michael Savage, New Zealand's first Labour Prime Minister, said they were applying Christianity to politics. Yes, there is a history of Christian socialism in New Zealand. Okay, let's get into it. Acts 2, they believed they had all things in common. The believers had all things in common. And then verse 44, verse 45 says, and they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all as any had need. Oh, they were selling their possessions and belongings and distributing the proceeds to all. And here's the big one. As any had need. I want you to remember that part there, that little clause. As any had need. Remember that. That's going to be important for later. Verse 46, and day by day, attending the temple together and breaking bread in their homes, they received their food of glad and generous hearts, praising God and having favor for all the people. Okay. So, then we jump to Acts 4. And now the full number of those who believed were of one heart and one soul, and no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. Oh. Oh no. Can you, dude, imagine if like some Republican, like capitalist Christian read this for the first time. Oh no. Let's read that again, shall we? No one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. Oh no. Let's read that article again, shall we? Of Christians' men's goods, which are not common. And this says, no one said anything that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. What do you think that sounds like, guys? That sounds like socialism. They didn't believe in private property. And with great power, the apostles were giving their testimony to the resurrection of the Lord Jesus, and great grace was upon them all. There was not a needy person among them. So as any had need, they received their needs. For as many as were owners of lands or houses sold them and brought the proceeds of what was sold and laid at the apostles' feet, and it was distributed to each as any had need. Let's say that again. It was distributed to each as any had need. This is the ESV. It was distributed to each as any had need. If you're in the know about socialism, you know where this is going. And then before we get to that bit, Acts 11 says, now in these days prophets came down from Jerusalem to Antioch, and one of them named Agabus stood up and foretold by the Spirit that there would be a great famine over all the world. This took place in the days of Claudius. So the disciples determined, everyone according to his ability, decide to send relief to the brothers living in Judea. What is the Marxist slogan? I know I've just been saying that. I'm not saying that the early church was socialist, but Marxist, but it's worth just saying this. What is the Marxist slogan? What's the most famous quote by Karl Marx? From each according to his ability, to each according to his need. That quote is believed by historians, and they are correct, to be taken directly from the New Testament. It is a composite quote from Acts 11. Everyone gave according to his ability, or you could translate it from each according to his ability, and then from Acts 4 and Acts 2, and distributed to each according to his needs. So the Marxist slogan is literally a quote from the New Testament. Oh, okay. But the New Testament's not socialist at all, right? They're all free market capitalists, right? Yeah. Sure, buddy. So what's going on here? We have a socialist mentality of a community, and it's not individualism. You're part of a community, and you are responsible for your brother's needs. If he's in need, it's your responsibility to look after his needs. Okay, so that's out the way already. So it's a communal viewpoint rather than an individualistic one. Also, people who had possessions and wealth were expected to give their wealth to the needy. And also, we have the idea that they didn't really believe in private property, because it says in Acts 4, no one said that any of the things that belonged to him was his own, but they had everything in common. We need to talk very briefly because about what private property means, or what personal property means. Personal property is things like your clothing, your books, your glasses, like that kind of stuff. And for the sake of this illustration, we could extend it also to your family. My children are my children. They're not your children. I don't believe in, like, some socialists believe that like a state or the community should raise the children rather than the parents and stuff like that's all weird and freaky. No. My children are my children. My wife is my wife, right? She's my wife. She's no one else's. Private property is a bit broader in scope. It's things like land. It's things like a farm. It's means of production. It's the stuff from which you gather the wealth. Okay, so yeah, like farms, like crops, like cattle, right? That's private property. And the idea of socialism is that private property, so the means of production, the cattle, the coal mine, the crops, that kind of stuff, should be communally managed and administered, and the workers on that stuff should have obviously a share in the profits, rather than someone owns the land, one individual owns the land, pays people to work on it, pays them a tiny little thing just so they can live day to day, while he reaps all the profits. And socialism is saying we don't agree with that. And it's also saying that private property, even as a concept, the idea of someone owning land in perpetuity and it's theirs and no one else has a share in it, and I can do whatever the heck I want with it, and I can get as much money out of it as I want, and all the profits go to me, even though I don't even work in the land. I own it, but I've never worked a day in my life in that farm. Other people work in that farm. Other people spend 9 hours a day, 5 days a week in that land, and I've never set foot in it. But I reap all the profits, and I can do what I want with my land, and all that money goes to me. We're saying we don't agree with that whole way of seeing it. The land is ours. We share it. We share these things in common. It's communal. That is what we are seeing here in the New Testament. And this is what we're going to be seeing in the Church Fathers in just a moment. Paul says, I suspect a word concept fallacy in New Dealing with Article 38, not going to lie. A lot of what I said was a joke. I did initially talk about how you can make all this work and whatnot. But when it says goods which are not common, I mean, it's I couldn't help myself but make the joke. But it says it's touching right, title, and possession of the same. That does seem to be talking about private property there. That does seem to be talking about, like land titles and what have you. Is this what we're seeing in the New Testament? Not really, unless you just say that it's saying that it's your belongings, you really should be giving it to the community, but you don't have to. If it's saying that, then obviously we're in agreement. But I don't know if it is saying that. But it's such a short article anyway that it's kind of vague on the issue, and it's obviously written centuries before the socialist movement, so it's not really. I think we can kind of just leave it out of this conversation. All right. There we go. Don't you think we're imposing modern 21st century terms and government on an ancient people group? Even in the examples given in Scripture, these aren't government ordained, but they out of love. You're not listening to what I'm saying. I never said it was state owned. I explicitly said we're not talking about state run, government run socialism, unless you're just late to the show or something. Someone said, didn't mean to throw a spanner in the works with asking about Article 38. You did, though. You did. It's okay. We had some laughs out of it. Okay, well, let's keep moving on. So we're going to get to the Church Fathers now. We're going to whiz through them. I don't want to spend too much time sort of giving commentary on the quotes. We're just going to read the quotes out to you, just so you can see. There's obviously more than just these, but these are there's some choice ones. So this is from the Didache, which was written in the 1st century, possibly by the apostles. Probably not. It's probably written in the 2nd century, to be honest. But that, people say it's written in the 1st century by the apostles. Sure. But anyway, it's a very early text. And this is what it says in chapter 4. You shall not turn away from him that is in need, but you shall share all things with your brother, and shall not say that they are your own. What? So you should give to someone according to his need. That's one half of the Marxist slogan. But you shall share all things of your brother. That's called socialism. And shall not say that they are your own. That is to go against private property. They're not your own. Now, you got to understand what's really going on here. We're not saying that we're going to obliterate by the state any concept of private ownership. We're not saying that. It's just that the concept of you owning a thing and saying that It has nothing to do with anyone else. It's all for me. It's just for me, me, my profit, my money, my wealth. It has nothing to do with anyone else. Even though everyone, other people work the land. No, it's for me. It's my money. We're saying that's not the mentality you should have. You have a communal responsibility. Your means of production, your private property that other people work on, the profits should be communally distributed from each according to his ability, to each according to his need. This is what the book of Acts obviously is showing. And this is what the Didache is saying. All right, so for if you share what is immortal, how much more things which are temporary? Okay. So then we've got the Epistle of Barnabas, which was written, I actually think it was written in the 1st century, or at the very least the very early 2nd century, possibly by the Apostle Barnabas. It echoes the Didache, which is very interesting, how closely they echo each other. But it says here, it says in chapter 19, you shall share all things with your neighbor. You shall not call things your own. You shall not call things your own. For if you are partakers in common things which are incorruptible, how much more those which are corruptible? Okay. Justin Martyr, in the mid-2nd century, in his first apology, chapter 14, said, we who once valued above all things the acquisition of wealth and possessions now bring what we have into a common treasury and share with everyone in need. Okay, so he's talking about the early Christian practice of distributing money, possessions into a common treasury, which is then distributed to each according to his need. That's called socialism. That is socialism. What? Socialism is the USSR? No, it's not. That is a version of socialism. Lucian, a pagan author in the 2nd century, said of Christians, Christians despise all possessions and share them mutually. That is a rejection of private property and the social sharing of wealth and goods, otherwise known as socialism. Clement of Alexandria, one of my heroes, he says in his book, The Instructor, this is in the 2nd century, he says, quote, private property is the fruit of iniquity. Oh, private property is the fruit of iniquity. What, you some kind of socialist? You some kind of socialist? You some kind of commie? Private property is the fruit of iniquity. I know that God has given us the use of goods, but only as far as is necessary. To each according to his need. And he has determined that the use shall be common. Dude, this is just socialism. He's determined that the use of goods shall be common, and private property is the fruit of iniquity. The use of all things that are found in this world ought to be common to all men. Okay, this is Saint Clement of Alexandria, one of the most important church fathers of all time. All right, if this man didn't exist and he right, none of his works existed, you as a Christian would be different. You would not believe the same things you do. This man had an extremely important part to play in the history of Christian thought. All right, he's better than you. He's smarter than you. He's more important than you. And he said this, and so that has weight. The use of all things that are found in this world ought to be common to all men. Only the most manifest iniquity makes one say to another, this belongs to me, that to you. Hence the origin of contention among men. He says the origin of contention among men is the concept of private property. Right? He rejects the mere concept of saying, this belongs to me, that to you. That's the crux of the capitalist system. That is the crux of Republican Party conservative economics. He is saying that is the origin of contention among men. It is the fruit of iniquity. That's Clement of Alexandria. Ambrose of Milan in the 4th century, very important church father, had enormous influence on St. Augustine. He said this, quote, you ready for this? Private property is not a matter of justice, for it is not according to nature, which has brought forth all good things for all in common. Dude, if you just heard that out of context, you'd think that it was by Karl Marx. That That is just socialism. That is called socialism. That is what socialists say. That is what you find in the Communist Manifesto. Not that I'm saying that these guys are Marxists, but I'm just like, this is socialism, and that is irrefutable. Ambrose of Milan, 4th century. Private property is not a matter of justice, for it is not according to nature, which has brought forth all good things for all in common. God has created everything in such a way that all things are to be possessed in common. That is a rejection of the mere concept of private property. You understand this? They didn't believe in the mere concept of it. They rejected it at its root. On a philosophical level, on a conceptual level, they fundamentally reject the notion of private property itself. He says God has created everything in such a way that all things are to be possessed in common. Now, this doesn't, the slow bros, the low IQ guys, the Republican Party hicks aren't going to get this. We're not saying that I'm going to steal your stuff. Don't worry, bro. I live in New Zealand. I'm not coming for your money, okay? I'm not coming for your guns. Right? I'm just some schmuck here in New Zealand, okay? Don't worry. Okay, your guns are safe, all right? Don't worry. Don't freak out. Now, what are we saying? We're not saying that you have to give up your personal property. We're not saying you don't have personal property. This is my wedding ring. This is my wedding ring, okay? It's mine. I'm not saying that someone can just take it. That's mine now. No. We're talking about private property. We're talking about means of production, means of wealth. We're talking about wealth itself in the sense that if you're rich and someone's in need, that's a problem. Your wealth is communally owned in the sense that how did you make your wealth? You made it through other people. That's how it always works. He's another person too. Does he have a share or some kind of claim in that wealth? Yes, he does. Is the state going to forcibly take your money and give it to him? Are they the church fathers advocating for that? No, they're not. But they are saying that on a conceptual level, wealth is communally owned because everyone has rights to wealth because it is communally generated. And you don't own it in a vacuum. You have a responsibility to your neighbors. Everything is communal. It's a communal outlook. In other words, it's socialism. It's a socialist outlook on wealth, on property, on means of production, rather than an individualistic capitalist one. That's the fact of it. You think these guys are capitalists? Then you're an idiot. They are not. They are socialists. Obviously, that's anachronistic. That term had not been invented yet. They didn't even speak the language that that word would come from. But this is what it is. And guys like the earliest socialists, even like Karl Marx, are drawing massive inspiration from these figures. All right? That's what historians agree on. Historians of the socialist movements. Back to Ambrose. So everything is to be possessed in common. Nature, therefore, is the mother of common right. Usurpation is the mother of private right. So the concept of private property is usurpation. It's natural to have common rights. Another quote by Ambrose. He says, "You are not making a gift of your possession to the poor person. You are handing over to him what is his." What? When you give your possessions to the poor, you're not giving him a gift. You're giving him what's his due. That's socialism. You have a responsibility. You have a duty to do it. Now, and even to the point that if you're wealthy, you have to give your money to the poor. You have to, as a moral duty. But we're not saying that because it's a moral duty and you have to do it, the state is therefore going to forcibly make you do it. Although we will get to politics later on. I actually, I'm not saying that these guys were socialists. They didn't have the view of this. They didn't even have the concept of the state like we do today. All right. As it pertains to what the state should do or shouldn't do, we actually are going to briefly talk about that. And I do believe actually in some state-led wealth redistribution, that kind of thing. All right. But I'm just being very honest about and clear that that's not what these guys are saying. They're talking about within the church community. If you're going to be a Christian, if you're going to join the community of the church, then it is expected of you to share your goods. It is expected of you to reject private property. And when you give your goods up and you give to someone according to his need and according to your ability, we're not going to clap and cheer and say, well done. We're just going to say, yeah, that's what is expected of you. Yes. That's like what we do here. Right? Because they're creating a socialist cooperative. And here's the big one. This is Basil the Great, 4th century, one of my absolute favorite saints. My firstborn son is named after him. He's called Basil. His middle name is Gregory, after Gregory of Nyssa. That should tell you everything you need to know. And so this is what? Basil the Great, right? Total G, total Chad, 4th century. This is what he says. Here we go. Fling wide your doors. Give your wealth free passage everywhere. As a great river flows by 1,000 channels through fertile country, so let your wealth run through many conduits to the homes of the poor. But you say, I am wronging no one. I am merely holding on to what is mine. What is yours? Who gave it to you so that you could bring it into life with you? Why? You are like a man who pinches a seat at the theater at the expense of latecomers, claiming ownership of what was for common use. Common use. That's what the rich are like. Having seized, this is very important here. This is extreme. All right. This is beyond socialism. This is communism. This is Basil the Great. Here we go. Having seized what belongs to all, the rich claim it as their own on the basis of having got there first. Whereas, if everyone took for himself enough to meet his immediate needs and release the rest for those in need of it, there would be no rich and no poor. If I quoted that to you, you would believe that's like Lenin. You'd think that's Marx and Lenin. Nah, that's St. Basil the Great, bro. That's one of the Cappadocians. Without St. Basil the Great, you're cooked. You don't have the same theology you do now. Do you have any idea how important this man was? I repeat, like I said about Clement, he is smarter than you. He is better than you. He is more holy than you. He is more righteous than you. He is more important than you will ever be. That is the reality of it. And this is what he is saying. And without Basil the Great, you do not have the development of the doctrine of the Trinity and the doctrine of the Spirit and of Christology like we have now. He was absolutely instrumental to that. The Niceno-Constantinopolitan Creed has Cappadocian theology as its major source of influence. And here's what he's saying. But he's just a commie, right? He's just a dumb commie. Okay, maybe you should listen to what he's saying. And what does it sound like? It sounds like socialism. It doesn't sound like socialism. It is socialism. I'll repeat that bit again. Having seized what belongs to all, the rich claim it as their own on the basis of having got there first. Whereas if everyone took for himself enough to meet his immediate needs and release the rest for those in need of it, there would be no rich and no poor. When a man strips another of his clothes, he's called a thief. Should not a man who has the power to clothe the naked but does not do so be called the same? The bread in your larder belongs to the hungry. The cloak in your wardrobe belongs to the naked. The shoes in your the shoes in your aloe. Low IQ, mem. The shoes you allow to rot belong to the barefoot. The money in your vaults belongs to the destitute. The money in your vaults belongs to the destitute. Not you should do it you should do it as like a gift. No, it belongs to them. You do injustice to every man whom you could help, but do not. If you are rich, how can you remain so? If you cared for the poor, it would consume your wealth. When each one receives a little for one's needs, and when all owners distribute their needs simultaneously for the care of the needy, no one will possess more than his neighbor. That's what he wants, you understand? He wants no one to possess more than his neighbor. That's communism. This is beyond that's communism. Okay, that's Basil the Great. I just imagine there's a few people here who had no idea the fathers taught this, right? This is what they said. Now here's John Chrysostom, right? Another base big boy in the 4th century, John Chrysostom. Here's this. He says, mine and thine, or mine and yours. These chilling words, which introduce innumerable wars into the world, should be eliminated from the church. Wait, the concept of mine and yours should be eliminated from the church. That's the rejection of private property, otherwise known as socialism. Then the poor would not envy the rich because there would be no rich. Then the poor would not envy the rich because there would be no rich. Neither would the poor be despised by the rich, for there would be no poor. All things would be in common. Welcome to communism. Not to enable the poor to share in our goods is to steal from them and deprive them of life. The goods we possess are not ours, but theirs. The goods we possess are not ours, but theirs. All right, that's going to do it for the Church Fathers. The fact of the matter is, this is socialism. That is not refutable. Don't even try. Has anyone tried? I'd love to see it. I'd love to see it. Someone please try and tell me that Basil and John Chrysostom weren't socialists. That would be great if you could. It would be very funny. It would make my day, to be honest. But you can't try because they were, irrefutably. Now, where did they get it from? They got it from the New Testament. And this is important. We're going to get to that in the next section. I'm going to sip of water first. Why did they believe in it? Is this some random thing? They just pulled this out of thin air? Like, they're Christian, they believe in blah, 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 but they're also socialists for some reason. No, it comes out of Christian doctrine. This is the conclusion to other core teachings in the New Testament, some of which you've also forgotten about, like the flesh versus spirit dichotomy, which people say is Gnostic. That's Gnostic. No, that's also taught in the New Testament explicitly, and it's also taught in the Church Fathers explicitly, and the two are connected. We'll get to how they're connected later. So you got to understand this is all just part of the same part of the thing. This is part of Christianity. It is socialist. It has this flesh versus spirit tension, and right, it's all part of the same movement. It's part of the same identity. So the reality is, if you're a Christian who's like this Republican, Second Amendment, free market capitalism, like you're fundamentally opposed to the concept of like universal healthcare or like free healthcare. Like you're opposed to that idea. You're opposed to any concept of redistribution of wealth. You like tax cuts for the rich. You look at poor people with disdain because you think they're lazy and stupid. If you're that kind of person, and you're also the kind of person that if someone says there's a tension between the flesh and spirit, you think that's Gnostic, are you a Christian? Well, in one sense, you are if you believe in the Nicene Creed and you have faith in Jesus, blah, blah, blah. But there's a question there as well, because it's like, to what degree can you really say that you follow Jesus if you reject a fundamental teaching of his? Possibly, like in the Gospel of Luke, possibly the fundamental teaching. You understand? In the Gospel of Luke, you could go so far as to say that socialism is Jesus Christ's primary teaching, right? You're going to reject that totally and call yourself a Christian. We've got a bit of a problem here. You just don't have a Christian ethos. You just don't. Right? Your whole worldview, your system of ethics, of politics, or whatever, is just not Christian. You have to understand that. Christianity is socialist. It is anti the flesh. If you're going to deny those things, then we've got issues here, man. You're just not playing the same game as us. You got to think about that. All right. Now, so that's the Church Fathers. All right. Now let's get to Scripture. Well, back to Scripture. We already looked at Acts, but first of all, in Scripture, we do see this very obvious favoring of the poor and opposition to the rich. Okay. So in Luke 1, it says from verse 52, he has brought down the mighty from their thrones and exalted those of humble estate. He's filled the hungry of good things, and the rich he sent away empty. Luke 4, verse 18, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because he has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. Luke 6. You ready for this? Blessed are you who are poor, for yours is the kingdom of God. Blessed are you who are hungry, for you shall be satisfied. But woe to you who are rich, for you have received your consolation. Woe to you who are full, for you shall go hungry. Right. It's pretty obvious what's happening here. Okay. You've got the rich man and Lazarus parable. This rich man just like goes to the fires because he was rich and didn't look after a poor man. And a poor beggar, he goes to Abraham's bosom because he was poor. You got James 5. Well, I mean, the whole book of James is anti the rich, right? The whole book. But here in James 5, he says, "Come now, you rich, weep and howl for the miseries that are coming upon you. Your riches have rotted, and your garments are moth-eaten. Your gold and silver have corroded, and their corrosion will be evidence against you and will eat your flesh like fire. You have laid up treasure in the last days. Behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields." What? He's siding with the laborers on your field. This is a rejection of private property implicitly. "Behold the wages of the laborers who mowed your fields, which you kept back, the profits of which you kept back by fraud." That's called socialism. It's fraud to keep back the profits from the workers who worked in your field. Those workers are crying out against you, and the cries of the harvesters have reached the ears of the Lord of hosts. You have lived on the earth in luxury and in self-indulgence. You have fattened your hearts in a day of slaughter. Right? I mean, come on, guys. It's pretty obvious what's happening here. And I'll note this for later. What's one of the reasons why James is so opposed to the rich and to riches in general? It's because they're corruptible. They're corrodable. There's a flesh versus spirit thing here. The mere concept of private property is rejected partially because those properties, those belongings, are corruptible and not eternal, and therefore don't really exist eternally like spiritual things do. Okay. Luke 3, John the Baptist said, "Whoever has 2 tunics is to share with him who has none, and whoever has food is to do likewise." Luke 6, "Give to everyone who begs from you, and from one who takes away your goods, do not demand them back. If you lend to those from whom you expect to receive, what credit is that to you? Even sinners lend to sinners to get back the same amount. So when you lend, expect nothing in return." When you lend, expect nothing in return. Luke 10, Jesus says, "Go your way. Behold, I'm sending you out as lambs in the midst of wolves. Carry no money bag, no knapsack, no sandals, and greet no one on the road." Why? Because he wants us to live in such a way that we're sharing things in common, right? That you're going to go to a town and they're going to look after you, right? There's the Good Samaritan, right? This guy is commended for giving his money and time to a total stranger. There's the Lord's Prayer. "Forgive us our sins as we forgive those who are indebted to us." That is clearly a financial angle there, right? As we forgive those who are indebted to us, he's saying like financial debts, because that's the context of the Sermon on the Mount. As I forgive people's financial debts, so when I lend, I don't expect in return. To that same degree, please God, can you forgive my sins and my debts to you, my spiritual debts? That's what it's saying there. So that even the Lord's Prayer has a bit of a socialist undertone to it. Luke 12. Yeah, Jesus says, "Take care and be on your guard against all covetousness, for one's life does not consist in the abundance of his possessions." Right? This is a rejection of possessions as fleshly and corruptible. Hence why you reject private property as a mere concept. "And he told them a parable, saying, the land of a rich man produced plentifully. He thought to himself, what shall I do? For I have nowhere to store my crops. And he said, I will do this. I'll tear down my barns and build larger ones, and I'll store all my grain and my goods. And I'll say to my soul, soul, you have ample goods laid up for many years. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry. But God said to him, fool, this night your soul is required of you, and the things you prepared, whose will they be? So is the one who lays up treasures for himself and is not rich towards God. Again, fleshly goods will not be coming with you in the kingdom, right? You're not going to be taking your crop with you. You're not going to be taking your cattle with you. You're not going to be taking your coal mine with you that you inherited from your daddy. Okay, you're not taking those. They are corruptible. They are finite. That is why we reject as a mere concept private property. Because they're finite, they are communal. What matters more is eternal things like loving one another. And how do you love one another? A key way is you look after their needs. Jesus then said straight after that, therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you'll eat, about your body, what you'll put on. That's a famous one. He talks about the lilies of the field and that kind of thing. And he says, don't be anxious about food, clothing, money. People sort of turn that into like this teaching about don't be anxious in general or something. No, this is specifically talking about don't be anxious about possessions, partially because it is taken for granted that a functional Christian community will look after everyone. Your needs will be taken care of by the Christian community. Why does Jesus assume that will happen? Because he taught them to do it. So someone might read this today who goes to church every Sunday and is genuinely in need, genuinely does not have enough money to put food on the table for their family. This happens to people, by the way. And they're going to read that and think, what? Now, there is a sense in which God will always ensure somehow that you can get through. And I've actually experienced this many times. But they might be thinking, hold on, I'm like in need all the time. I'm barely getting by. What's going on here? What's going on here is that your church sucks. Because there's rich boomers in your church while you don't have enough to put food on your plate. And they think that they're good Christians. They're not. They're barely meeting the standard, actually. Right? A functional church won't have needy people in the congregation, you understand? Unless they're all poor, like in my church. Like St. Timothy's. Everyone's poor. We can't really help. But if you've got rich boomers, and then you got really poor, you got like some poor single mom who can't feed her kids, that's an abomination. That's not a functional church community. That's barely a church. That's the reality of it. Sorry to put it so bluntly, but welcome to Christianity. Welcome to the teachings of Jesus. Welcome to the teachings of the early church. We actually respect those teachings and we listen to them on their face. And this is what they're saying. Luke 14, Jesus says, he says to a man who invited him to a banquet, when you give a dinner or a banquet, do not invite your friends or your brothers or your relatives or rich neighbors, lest they also invite you in return and you be repaid. But when you give a feast, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed because they cannot repay you. The poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, the kind of people that Republicans spit on because they think they're stupid and that's why they're poor and begging, right? The kind of people who think that if you don't have health insurance, then, oops, you should have gotten rich enough and had health insurance. You should work for a company that had a good health insurance plan. Yeah. Matthew 6. No one can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or he'll be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and money. You cannot serve. Now, every Christian reads that and thinks they follow it. I don't serve money. Oh, really? You don't serve money? Okay. How many homes do you own? If I even floated the idea of maybe you selling just one of your like 10 properties and giving the proceeds to the church to distribute as any had need, would you go, that's mine! That's my money! It's my money! It's my house! You get your filthy commie hands away from it! That's my private property! Would you do that? Because if you do, you serve money, not God, and you reject God because he taught against you. And you will be judged on the day of judgment for what you've done. You will. You really will. Do you understand this? This is very serious. I'm joking around, but this is quite serious for you. Those belongings don't belong to you in a vacuum. You have a responsibility, a communal one, to your neighbor, as is taught here in the New Testament and by the fathers. So no, it's not your money. It's our money, actually. You best start trying to figure out that. Otherwise, you might be in some serious trouble. Luke 16. I love this one. This is the parable of the dishonest manager. Now, this parable is famous because people will understand every one of Jesus' parables, right? You get what they're saying. People get to this one, they're like, "What is he saying? What does he say? I can't figure it out. What could he mean? It's so confusing." It ain't confusing, Buck. Buck. I don't know why I said that. It's not confusing. It's very straightforward. You just don't like what he's saying. You just don't like what he's saying. But let's read it, shall we? This is what he says. There was a rich man who had a manager, and charges were brought to him that this man was wasting his possessions. And he called him and said to him, "What is this that I hear about you? Turn in the account of your management, for you can no longer be manager." And the manager said to himself, "What shall I do, since my master is taking the management away from me? I am not strong enough to dig, and I am ashamed to beg. I've decided what to do, so that when I am removed from management, people will receive me into their houses." So, summoning his master's debtors one by one, he said to the first, "How much do you owe my master?" He said, 100 measures of oil. He said to him, "Take your bill and sit down quickly and write 50. Then he said to another, "How much do you owe?" He said, 100 measures of wheat. He said to him, "Take your bill and write 80. The master commended the dishonest manager for his shrewdness. For the sons of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own generation than the sons of light. And I tell you," here we go, "make friends for yourselves by means of unrighteous money, so that when it fails, they may receive you into the eternal dwellings." Now, people hear that. What? Make friends by means of unrighteous money? What's he saying? It's clear what he's saying. Let's make a more contemporary example of this. You work for a health insurance firm, right? Let's say you have a case before you. A person has a very serious health problem. Maybe it's something like cancer. If they don't get coverage to pay for their treatment, they will die. Or they will have to bankrupt their entire family to pay for the treatment. Either way, their family is ruined, because if they die, like that's their children's father gone. That's the wife's husband gone. That's their source of income gone. He's the cornerstone of the whole family. He's going to die or bankrupt the whole family if he doesn't get coverage. Now, he is insured, but I don't know how it works in your stupid system in America, by the way, so don't be like, "That's not how it works." I don't care. Can you just roll with the analogy? So this is, in my little universe that I'm creating, this is what happens. He is not owed coverage because he's actually missed payments. Now, he's not missed a lot, but he's missed enough that he can't get the coverage. They're going to decline. They're going to decline it. Now, let's say for the course of his life, he has paid this health insurance company thousands and thousands of dollars. The payments he's missed amount to hundreds. But all that money that he's already done, that he never got coverage, he's never needed coverage, all those years he paid thousands, now when he needs it, he's going to be declined because he's missed a few hundreds. You have his case before you. And you go, let's sweep that under the rug a bit. Let's add a zero here, or we'll delete something here in the file and get you the coverage. Or you don't even have to do that. You don't even have to cook the books. You just give them the coverage. Maybe no one's ever going to find out. And if your boss comes over to you and says, "What happened with that case?" You go, "Oh, yeah. We gave him the coverage." And you don't tell him that he missed the payments. You just do it. Okay? You're going against the rules of your company, but you've saved him from death or family from bankruptcy. That's the kind of thing that Jesus is saying here. Oh, you owe him 100 measures of something. Let's make that 50. Right? That's what he's saying in the parable. Now, the master because he's done this to everyone, he can't fire him now because everyone's going to revolt. They're going to riot. If he's like, get rid of them. No, he fires the manager and is like, no, you pay me what you owe. What are they going to do to him? They're going to kill him, right? This is the ancient world. People riot and kill people. It's a very violent time. And so that's why he says, you've bested me. You've outplayed me. You've outmaneuvered me. That's kind of what's happening here. Now, the mere concept of this teaching, it's hinging on, this teaching is hinging on the fact that we just don't have this kind of capitalist Republican view of money. We don't. We don't care about your silly little health insurance rules. This guy's going to die. Sometimes you can do those things for a greater good, okay? If you're hiding Jews under your floorboards and the Gestapo or whoever it is like, you are hiding enemies of state under the floorboards, are you not? You lie. You go, no, I'm not. Jews under my floorboards? What are you talking about? That's what you do. Okay? It's called being a good person. Sometimes you do that. And so sometimes you go against the rules of the land if they're immoral and unethical for a greater purpose. So if I'm in the supermarket and I see what's clearly a single mother who's poor stealing baby formula, so she's not stealing a Rolex watch or something, it's baby formula for her baby. And let's say, I don't know why this would happen, but a security guard is like, did you see her steal that formula? I'm going to go, steal formula? Who? I didn't see anyone steal formula. What are you talking about? Right? That's what you do. I know that people don't like that. Like they can't cope with that. Too bad. That's what Jesus taught. All right, Luke 18. This is a good one. I love this one. And a rich man asked him, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Jesus said to him, why do you call me good? Know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not commit murder. Do not steal, blah, blah, blah. He says, all these I've kept from my youth. When Jesus heard this, he said to him, one thing you still lack, as in, you should do this and you haven't. Not, you can go, okay, this is like some silly Roman Catholic idea. What's the Roman Catholic idea, Paul, if you're in the chat, can help me out here, where it's like you go beyond what's required of you and you attain some special merit because you like went above and beyond. No, Jesus isn't saying that. He says you lack this. You needed to do this and you haven't done it. Okay? He says, one thing you still lack. Sell all that you have and distribute it to the poor, and then you'll have treasure in heaven. Oh, here we go. Paul says, works of supererogation. Yeah, right. I love how autistic Roman Catholicism is. They have works of supererogation. Okay, man. He says, check my above comment or above anecdote. Paul says, friendly Geordies once read a comment from an Aussie health worker who said he would use a system glitch to waive the $500 fee for people who critically needed but couldn't afford a certain service. Based. That's called being based. If you're hearing that and you're like, that's so, how could he do that? He's defrauded the health insurance company. Bruh. That's so cringe, man. I can't even describe how cringe that is. By the way, we're not going to go off then and say we should be killing health insurance people like that freak did. What's that guy's name that everyone in America loves for some reason? I shouldn't even say his name. Luigi Mangione. We're not saying that either, all right? But, you know, the whole health insurance thing is a racket and it's evil and people are dying because rich people want to make more money. It's sickening. All right. Here in New Zealand, we've got free healthcare, by the way. I've had some big health issues before. I've broken bones quite seriously and blah, 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 and that kind of thing. And I've had, with my son Basil, a very serious health crisis with him and didn't pay a dime, didn't pay a penny. And our economy is functional, right? Like, we're not living in a third world here, okay? We got a good economy. Like, it's hard times. We've got inflation and stuff, but you know, that's just the way it is currently. That's how it is everywhere. But, you know, before the inflation issues and stuff, you know, this is a functioning society, right? We get taxed more than Americans. All right. But if you need help, you don't have to worry about like, spending thousands of dollars because you've got cancer or something. That's just sickening. It can be done, Americans, believe it or not. It's crazy to think that it can be done, but it really can. I know. Shocking. So moving on back into this thing with the rich guy. On hearing these things, the rich man became very sad because he was extremely rich. That's my money. And Jesus, seeing he becomes sad, said, how difficult it is for those who have wealth to enter the kingdom of God. For it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich person to enter the kingdom of God. I once heard this rich guy say to me that the eye of the needle was like this really narrow passage in Jerusalem, and that like a camel could very much go through it. It's just that it would be quite difficult. It's like, that's called lying. Those who heard it said, then how can any of them be saved? By the way, a lot of translations make that, how can anyone be saved? He says, how it should really be, how can any of them be saved? And Jesus said, what is impossible with man is possible for God. So strictly speaking, it is impossible for rich people to be saved, yes. But it is also possible. How? Put it this way. It is not possible for a rich person to be saved. It is possible for the person who is rich to be saved. Understand? For a rich person to be saved, he has to stop being rich. He has to stop being a rich person. Does that mean he has to stop being a rich person in this life? Otherwise, he'll be tortured forever consciously. No, there are other ways of no longer being a rich person. It means relinquishing your attitude towards wealth and possessions. That's the issue. You have to relinquish a rich attitude. Can that happen in the next life? Wow, that's an open question. Just putting that out there. But you need to relinquish that to be saved. Yes, you do. So if you're some kind of demon from the pit of hell, like Kenneth Copeland, I will blow the wind of God. No, he's got like a private jet. He's got like multiple mansions and stuff. This freak, this demon, is he in good graces of God? Hell no. Oh no. No. I would rather be a Muslim child in Gaza in terms of my relationship with God than Kenneth Copeland, than any of these freaks like Creflo Dollar. I make God my debtor. He my business partner. God is my business partner. Do you know that he said that? Actually, in a sermon, he said that. He's like, I make God my business partner. He in debt to me. That's Creflo Dollar. People like this videos of people like throwing money at him. He's like, give me more money. Give me more money. Yeah. He's a demon. He is a demon. You have a better shot of being saved if you're a poor Muslim living in Gaza than if you're Creflo Dollar. Oh, like really, they probably understand Jesus better than he does. They really do. Jesus says it's those who are blind have no guilt. Those who see and still reject the truth have the guilt. Right? If you're a pastor and you've read the New Testament and you still end up like Kenneth Copeland with your private jet, you are in greater trouble than if you're someone who's never read the New Testament. But because of the severity of their wrongness, because of just how severe it is. Okay. Yeah, and then so he says, so with God, it is possible, even though strictly speaking impossible. And then Peter says, see, we've left our homes and followed you. And then Jesus said, truly I say to you, there's no one who has left house or wife or brothers or parents or children for the sake of the kingdom of God who will not receive many times more in this time and the age to come eternal life. Cryptic saying, but yeah, we'll just sort of we'll leave that one. It doesn't really matter. It's quite cryptic what he's saying there because it's sort of obviously not true. I mean, people lose stuff all the time and don't gain it back. But I think he's using hyperbole, and I think it should be interpreted allegorically there. Okay. Matthew 25, it's quite a long passage, so I won't read the whole thing, but it's the one where, Jesus separates the goats from the sheep, and the goats go into the punishment of the age to come, and the sheep go into to inherit the life of the age to come. And the distinction between them is that the sheep's clothed the hungry, visited those in prison, visited those who were sick, looked after the stranger, gave thirsty people drink, gave hungry people food, and the others didn't. And so that's the issue there. And he says, essentially what he's doing there is the Jews at the time believed that basically all Jews are going to inherit the resurrection, and basically all Gentiles are going to either be annihilated, or some of them believed be consciously tormented for a limited period of time before eventually being annihilated. It doesn't appear that first century Jews believed in eternal conscious torment, certainly not in the extravagant ways that psychopaths like Jonathan Edwards would describe. And Jesus is sort of saying, look, as someone is going to be inheriting the reward of the age to come, aionios being the adjective for age, so it's punishment of the age, not everlasting, as some translations put it. It's not going to be for being a Jew. It's going to be for looking after the poor. If someone's going to be getting punished in the age to come, it's going to be for not looking after the poor, not just for being a Gentile. So he's reworking their whole assumption there. That's what's going on. Okay, so that's the New Testament basis for socialism. It's pretty clear, right? It's pretty obvious what's going on. So before we get to why socialism is taught, so we looked at that it's taught. It's pretty clear that it is. Now, why? Before we do that, let's get to some comments. So someone says, related thoughts on the commandment teaching, you shall not steal. If it was intended for men not to have private ownership, then why is there an acknowledgement of theft? You can't steal personal belongings. But also, we're saying it's not done by force. If you own land, it is theft for me to somehow, like, if I own cattle, it is theft for you to steal it. And I'm not saying it should be taken by force. However, on a deeper level, the mere concept of owning things and you reaping all the profits for yourself, and the mere concept of the means of production, the means of wealth being only given, only possessed, and the profits only being given to the owner, and any concept of it is rejected in favor of a concept that the means of production and the means of profit and the profits themselves are actually, in some sense, owned communally. Because who worked the fields, who milked the cows, so on and so forth. That's what's happening, okay? We're thinking at a bit of a higher conceptual level here, okay? What do you think of distributism? I guess I'll talk more about the politics later. Obligatory charity within the church is not the same as abolition of private property and socialism in the political sense. Okay, yeah. Maybe you're just late. I've already talked about how they're not necessarily talking about socialism politically in the sense of a USSR one-party socialist state. I've made that pretty clear. But you said it's not the same as abolition of private property. Did you hear Basil and John Chrysostom? Did you hear what they said about private property? Maybe you made that comment before I read those bits, because it's pretty clear, mate. They did not believe in private property. No. Not in the way that we do. Again, it's a bit of a higher conceptual level than maybe what you're working at here. Okay, we're not. Do I own my phone? Is this my phone? This is my phone, yes. If you take this phone from me, is that theft? That is theft. Is it a sin for you to steal this from me? Yes, it would be a sin for you to steal it from me. We're not talking about that kind of thing. All right. Suppose I owned a farm with cattle. Would it be a sin for you to steal all my cattle? Yes. Do I own that cattle? Yes, I do. In some sense, yes. However, if I have workers work my field, and I have workers, milk my cattle, or whatever the heck they do with cattle, and all the profit goes to me, and I pay them a pittance, where they only live paycheck to paycheck, and I'm rich off the profits, and all goes to me. Do we believe in that? No, that is rejected. Why? Because the field and the cattle and the wealth and the profits are not mine to keep. The community has rights over them. They have rights, they have claims, legitimate claims over those things. Okay? Because I didn't work the fields, I didn't work the cattle. Right? And what goes around comes around. Money doesn't just grow on trees. We're in a shared society together. If I get money, it's because I took money. It's because someone lost money and gave it to me. It's all the shared system. But the private property system undercuts a lot of this and just says, well, I own the land, so I take all the profits. That's ridiculous. You get all the profits because a piece of paper says you own the land? Who worked those fields? And what are you going to do with that money? Just get rich? Buy a yacht? While the very people working your fields, off the sweat of their backs, you've got that profit to buy a stupid yacht, you freak. They are in need, and they don't have enough to pay rent. They don't have enough to put gas in the tank to even drive themselves to work. And you're not going to care about it? No. You have a responsibility to look after them. That's what we're saying. This is the crux of socialism, and that is obviously what the fathers and the New Testament is teaching. Sorry, when I get very angry, people who are new here, I get very angry and like unhinged and sort of like, nah. I'm not getting angry at you. I'm just sort of, this is just how I go, bro. This is just how we do it with the live streams, okay? We get a little bit charged up. We get a bit fired up, a bit energized, but unhinged. We're trying to have some fun. We're trying to be interesting, okay? You will be bored to tears. I've been talking for an hour and 39 minutes. If it was an hour and 39 minutes, it'd be mean like, so the socialist system is, and I understand that you when you think socialism, I understand that you think of Marxist-Leninism. What I'm advocating for here is a different. See how boring this? No. Okay, so we're gonna be a little fun, a little bit salty. All right. The violent overthrow of the bourgeois or the bourgeoisie is the only way to achieve a classless society. Quote Basil or something. Yeah, pretty much. Pretty much. Thomas says, Father Devereux, don't call me father. Just me. Can you look at my arguments? I've already responded to those. So there you go. Helping someone out of an act of obedience is not the state owning the means of production. We do it out of love of God and people. That's not socialism, River. Okay, so either you're not listening to me or you are late. I've already made those clarifications. Thank you. Did you talk about the fact that Abraham and other examples of righteousness had huge wealth? Okay, I'm not going to go into all that. That's the Old Testament. This is the New Testament. Martianism! Okay, all right. Okay. The New Testament has different moral standards. The Old Testament at times, yes, that is undeniable fact. Okay, it's called the Sermon on the Mount, right? The Old Testament, I mean, Abraham was also polygamous, right? He had concubines, or one at least. You know, there's Jacob was polygamous. Is that okay? You think that's okay? Can we be polygamous now because Jacob was? Oh, no. So what? There's a little bit of a distinction then. Well, in the New Testament's moral and ethical standards don't entirely fit with the Old Testament's ones. That's crazy. That's crazy. What about divorce? What did Jesus say? Moses permitted divorce only because of the hardness of your hearts, but from the beginning, it was not so. Pretty clear concept that God put up with some stuff that he doesn't anymore. The standards are higher in the New Testament, such as with what you do with wealth. That being said, if you read the Torah, the law of Moses, a lot of scholars would argue that that actually itself is a socialist text because of what it has to say about these sorts of things, in fact. Again, sorry, dude, I'm not mad at you. I'm not getting mad at you. I sound like I'm mad at you or like I'm telling you off. I'm not. Sorry, this is just the way I act. I need to keep making that clear in case people get upset. Quote, "I'm out to make money. I like money." Ben Shapiro in a 2019 speech to the Young America's Foundation. Sums up U.S. conservatism, really. Yeah, totally. Doesn't Ben Shapiro do like ads for like gambling, for like gambling companies? This guy is apparently this bastion of conservative values, family values, religion, Judeo-Christian values, and he does ads for gambling companies. Yikes. Okay. Caleb, I love Caleb. He's like one of the goats. He says, just tuning in, I'm assuming we're talking about non-Marxian socialism, right? Yes, correct assumption. Well done. Other people seem to have not made the same assumption, unfortunately. This guy goes, by socialism, do you mean the state owning? No, I don't. Yes, I would like to know what socialism means too. Watch the beginning of the video. Okay, I'm going to stop there with the comments and let's move on. These are starting to drive me insane. So, why were the early church socialist? Again, is it like just this random belief? They just so happened to all be socialist for no reason. Totally disconnected from all their other beliefs. They believe this, and also for some reason they were socialists. No, it comes out of their core beliefs. And why is that? Okay, so let's look. A good example of this is Matthew chapter 6. This is what it says from verse 19. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. The idea being that possessions are corruptible. They right? And this is part of the underpinning. Because what this is coming out of is the flesh versus spirit dichotomy, which I'll be looking at in my next video, next week. The flesh versus spirit dichotomy, which is clearly taught by the early church, by the New Testament, and people say it's Gnostic. The Gnostics didn't get their dualism out of thin air either. They took what was legitimately in the New Testament and they just took it to an extreme level beyond what they should have taken it to. But it's there. And the idea is this is most clearly in John's gospel and in books like Romans and Galatians and 1st and 2nd Corinthians. The idea is that things of the flesh are temporal, finite, corruptible, expendable, discardable. Things of the spirit are eternal and everlasting, and are therefore of a higher nature of reality to the flesh. Okay? And the fleshly things in some sense hold us back. They hold us back from caring about the things that matter the most, which are everlasting things, spiritual things. And since we ourselves are eternal spiritual beings, though we are also enfleshed, it's kind of ludicrous to think that we would possess private property in perpetuity. We don't. We don't take fleshly things with us into the next life. We don't have everlasting ownership of material things. And so based on that, the whole concept, the whole premise of private property is undercut. Because those things are of the fleshly world, of the fleshly realm. They're of a lower level of reality to the eternal things, to the spiritual things. That's a metaphysical underpinning for it, but on a moral level, as I've already said many times in the video, a Christian viewpoint sees things communally, right? How are human beings the image of God? One of the main reasons, sorry, the camera keeps getting out of focus. I don't know how to fix it. It's weird. Anyway, one of the main reasons is because we are communal. The image of God is all of mankind. We don't just pop out of a vacuum. We have We all come from a father and a mother, and we're all related to each other genetically and so on and so forth. We're part of one big mass. That's why it's in Adam that all men die, and in Christ that all men will live, right? That's why if Adam sinned, sin spreads to all men, and death spreads to all men. But because Christ is righteous, all men will be raised and be justified, as Paul says in Romans 5. So there's that stuff underpinning it as well. And so when we get to private property, we're just saying we reject the notion that you can have wealth or profits or property that you reap the benefits of as an individual, and the community has no rights or claims over that stuff as well. We just simply reject that premise. All right. And that, as I said, is simply flowing straight out of the core principles of the New Testament's ethics. Okay. I thought I was going to talk longer about that, but I feel like that's kind of all I need to say, really. I've already said quite a lot about private property there. I'll go back to some of these comments, and then we're going to talk about how we can practically follow this stuff today. Caleb says, in my interpretation, an ethic of charity and suspicion of obscene wealth is what we get from the fathers, not a precise economic system. It certainly rules out some systems, though. Yeah, that's true. Someone says, I don't think having obscene wealth is sinful anyway, considering the wealth like people like Abraham and David did. Oh my gosh, dude. I keep running into this problem all the time. The New Testament clearly teaches something, and someone goes, but the Old Testament said. All right, have you read the New Testament? Who cares? In some situations, that is true. The Old Testament tells you to circumcise your foreskin. What does the New Testament have to say about that? Have you read it? It says, don't. The Old Testament says that pork and shellfish are unclean foods, and if you eat them, you will be defiled. Jesus says all foods are clean, and there's nothing outside of you that can make you unclean. And then Paul says in 1 Timothy 4, to say that some foods are unclean is the teaching of demons. And in fact, God made all foods clean. He reiterates this in Galatians, Colossians, and Romans. The Old Testament says that adulterers are to be stoned to death. Jesus finds someone caught in the act and tells the crowd not to do it, and then lets her go. The Old Testament permits divorce. Jesus says, yes, it did, but from the beginning it was not so. It was only permitted because of your hardness of heart. But I say to you that to divorce your wife is to commit adultery. Okay? Jesus says, you've heard it said, love your neighbor and hate your enemies. But I say to you, love your enemies. I quote this to some kind of Christian nationalist guy with a MAGA hat and these Chad glasses. You'll quote that to him and he'll go, but the Old Testament said that I could hate my enemies. Yeah, it did. And what did Jesus say? You've heard it said you could hate your enemies, right? But I say love them. And you go, but I heard it said I could hate them. Yeah, you did. And what did Jesus say? You did heard it. Yeah, you heard it said that. Yes, you did. I say love them. Oh. Is that Marcionism? No, that is factually, objectively, irrefutably what it says in the text of the New Testament. That ain't Marcionism, unless you want to call Jesus a Marcionite. Do you want to go do that too? Because he's contradicting it. Isn't he? John 5 says he broke the Sabbath. Because he did. He worked on the Sabbath. He said that. He said, I'm working on the Sabbath. He plucked heads of grains with his disciples and rubbed them in their hands and ate them on the Sabbath. A man was stoned to death in Exodus 16 for gathering manna on the Sabbath. And someone else for gathering sticks. The Pharisees approach Jesus and say, you're violating the law of Moses. What does Jesus say? Does he say, I'm not? No, he doesn't say I'm not. He says, well, David ate the showbread, which is only permitted for priests, and someone greater than David is here. I'm Lord of the Sabbath. In other words, this is then, that was then, this is now. Okay? Speaking of David, how many wives did he have again? Oh, more than one, right? Right, okay. And so what, can we be polygamous because David was? What about Solomon? What about Jacob? Abraham had a little side piece, didn't he? He had a little side piece. Can I have a side piece? A little side chick, a little side grind? Can I have that? Oh, Abraham did. Oh my gosh, dude. Give me a break. Not having obscene wealth is sinful. Have you read the New Testament? But this is Marcionism, of course, right? Oh, that's Marcionism. That's Marcion. Yeah, you're pointing out the New Testament and the Old Testament don't exactly align on all these things. It's Marcionism, right? Yeah, sure. Gosh, you guys would really struggle to get through the church fathers. You'd think they're all Marcionite Gnostics. And commies. Well, they were commies, but... Someone says socialism is a system of society or group living in which there is no private property and the means of production are owned and controlled by the state. No, it's not. It doesn't have to be controlled by the state. Merriam-Webster and Britannica disagree. So does the early history of socialists. So did the first socialists. Oh, okay. The other Paul, have you read any of the Stoics on these ethical questions? Very, very close to the New Testament. Yeah, they are. I especially love Seneca's letter on masters and slaves, basically a New Testament teaching on the relationship. Correct. The New Testament is inspired by other views like Stoicism. Yep. Like, Hellenistic Judaism, like the writings of Philo, like Hellenism, Hellenism, and like Zoroastrianism. The eschatology of Second Temple Judaism is just copied wholesale from Zoroastrianism. So, is it freaky? No, it's not. It's all right. People just need to calm down. That shouldn't freak you out if you find that out. It shouldn't freak you out. Okay. All right. Someone said I should read this guy, Jared Winstanley. Yeah, I should. Caleb says, okay, I'm going to have to just stop reading all the comments. All right. Okay. The other Paul goes, everyone be easy on River. Kiwis aren't civilized, so they'll snap after the slightest pushback. Oh, we're not civilized? Bro, come on, man. We're not civilized? Dude, Aussies are barely human, okay? You're barely there, all right? That includes you, Paul. The most human part of you, Paul, is your Lebanese part. It's the Lebanese in you. That's the most human part of you. What was that politician who's like, don't you say that? I don't know why I did an American accent there. How dare you say that? Okay, anyway. Also, Aussies lost a war against emus. You guys declared war on emus and lost. Sorry, bro. Someone said that he was kicked out by a Catholic group chat because he was called a communist for simply quoting the church fathers. Oh, I can believe that. Oh, yeah. Dude, Catholics are weird on this. Like every Catholic I've looked at, even though some cardinals and popes have actually been friendly towards socialism. Like it's the YouTube armada who are like, no, they weren't socialist. It's like, okay. Yeah. Oh, here we go. Someone says, what do you think about other religions that have other stories extremely similar to Christianity, like Zoroastrianism, but came much earlier than Jesus' time with a lot of the same stories? I'll answer that later. I want to stay on topic. I'll just make a note to answer that later. How does one distinguish socialism from Marxism? I'm late. Have mercy. I have mercy on you, Caleb. Don't worry. A corporate estate, for example, like the other Paul's model. Well, the other Paul's model is something else, but yeah. No, I don't know. He's a corporatist, yeah. Still retains the mode of privately organizing capital. Oh, I don't know. I guess socialism is just a milder form of Marxism. I mean, Marx is a communist, and he says that socialism was the middle point between communism and the current system of capitalism. Okay, so I guess that's a big distinction. I mean, Marx's ultimate vision was for there to be no money at all. It's just more extreme. Anyway, we're about to get onto like what I think we should do with all this stuff. All right, I think we're gonna move on. So, having established that the New Testament and the Church Fathers were socialists, what do we do? Let's first talk about how we should live regardless of politics. So sorry, I can't help myself. Someone just commented, "This is heresy. The early church created the stock market." That's where I'm wearing my most like stockbrokerish shirt right now. I had the idea of having a green screen with like a McMansion behind me, and I was gonna have like a tie and like aviators and like play the role of like a Kenneth Copeland guy. But then a mate of mine said that would be like me trying too hard to be Jay Dyer. I thought he's probably right about that, so I didn't. Yeah, the early church were full of Zionist crony capitalists. Oh, amen, brother. Okay, so before we get to the politics of it, let's just get to practical living. First things first. If you have a church congregation and you've got rich people, they should be covering the needs of the poor people in the congregation. That is an obligation. All right? Lots of churches have rich people, rich boomers. They own lots of houses. They go up to church every Sunday and they think they're good little Christians. And their church gives money to overseas charities and blah, blah, blah. Meanwhile, there are other people who go to church every Sunday who don't have enough money to pay rent. They don't have enough money to have 3 meals a day. They don't have enough money for their children to eat. They don't have enough money for their children to have nappies and baby formula. They don't have enough money to fill up their car so they can even get to work in the morning. They're suffering. And they're in the same church as rich people who own multiple properties and live in luxury. And they share communion together. That's an abomination. It's disgusting. We should call it what it is. It's not, well, you're not quite doing it properly. It's an abomination. That is evil. If you're living in luxury and you could very easily be helping that person get what they need and you're not doing it, you are not a Christian and you are bound for the fires of Gehenna. Okay? Fact. Read the New Testament. See what it has to say. You read Matthew 25? What happens to the people who don't do that? What happens to them? You get to be of the sheep, do you? No, you don't. You don't. What did you think Christian ethics was all about? This is the thing. A lot of people, they think that when it comes down to it, when the rubber hits the road, this is what Christianity boils down to. Go to church every Sunday, believe intellectually in a list of doctrines. My list, not your list. My doctrines. And then on the ethical matters, it boils down to this. Don't swear. Don't get drunk. Don't smoke or vape. Don't do drugs. Only have sex with someone you're married to who's of the opposite sex. And be nice to people. Maybe. That's it. That's Christianity. No, there's actually other things involved, such as giving to the poor. Pretty central teaching, actually. Pretty central. Maybe even in Luke's gospel, like the teaching. So no. If you're a rich guy with multiple houses and you have your income is like multiple times larger than people in your church, no. You're not getting through just because you're not gay and because you don't smoke and you don't have tattoos, you don't swear. No. You have responsibilities. You have obligations. There are commandments. There are expectations of you that you are not meeting, and you need to. So, first things first, church communities should be, sharing wealth like they're told to. If you've got rich people, they should be helping the poor in need. A church should have a registry of the people in that congregation who are in actual need. Actual need. And the people in the congregation should be strongly encouraged, if not actually expected, to donate lots of money, not a pittance, a lot of money, and then that money should be used to be given to the people in their own congregations who are in need, paid by the church. That is what we see. That's a mild reading of Acts. We're not talking about forcing them to sell their houses. Or sorry, expecting them, I shouldn't say force, expecting them to sell all their houses and redistribute wealth. We're not even going there. We're just saying you donate, money, and we give it to the people in the congregation who have need. That's bare minimum. Bare minimum. If you're not doing that, if you're a church and there are people who've been coming to your church every Sunday for years and they are in desperate financial need, you are like in trouble as a church. You understand? You are simply disobeying Jesus on a core level. On a core level. Not like some obscure thing, on a central thing. You think the early church fathers would even recognize you as Christians? These guys were communists. They're extremists. That's what they are. They're going to walk into your church, and there's these rich people, and the pastor's rich. The pastor has 3 flippin' houses. The flippin' pastor's rich. He's got 3 houses. He's living in luxury. He's wearing a $5,000 suit. And there's people he's preaching to who can't even afford food. You think he's going to heaven straight after he dies? Oh, no, he's not. You think the early church fathers would recognize him as a Christian? No, they would not. They wouldn't. For them, this is core. This is core stuff. Core stuff. But people's minds have been so deluded and poisoned by politics, by Republican politics, that they hear that and they think that's heresy. They think I'm the one being a heretic. I'm some commie liberal. Things are bad, in other words, in contemporary Christianity. Things aren't good. They are freaking bad. Okay? All right. Now, don't let that shake your faith. Oh, what? The church has fallen. I thought the gates of Hades wouldn't prevail. Just calm down, okay? There's always problems. We're in a pretty bad patch right now, possibly because it's the end times. So just relax, okay? Whew. Just, here you go. What does Jesus say about all this? Focus on yourself, all right? I've been pointing out the planks in other people's eyes. Look at the speck in our own eyes, all right? What can you do? What can you do? Let's get to that now. What you can do is you can try and be a bit more communal and socialist with your money amongst your peers who have the same attitude. Okay, so for instance, in my life, I have friends, and I have closer friends and whatnot, and I have a bit of a I have friends who I'm very close with, and we kind of share money like all the time, in the sense that if I have a bit of money and he doesn't, like, I'm going to buy him dinner. And if I have no money and he has a bit of money, he's going to put gas in my car. And that's just kind of how we do it. Like, we go out for dinner and it's like, who's paying? Whose turn is it? It's just that kind of thing. And you can do that. And I think you can, if you start there, you can then start to extend that outward a bit. And you can then start to bring other people in, and eventually it can start to become a bit more organized. So those are just some ideas. Okay. Let's get now to politics. That's where everyone wants to go, right? Everyone loves talking about politics. So politics. Do I believe the state, whatever that means, should be socialist? I don't know, man. I kind of checked out of politics at the moment. I do believe that, let's put it this way. I think when you're talking about politics, you have to differentiate between an ideal, like my little dream scenario, utopian society, versus like reality. And why even talk about when it comes to reality, you just may as well stick with brutal reality. And my brutal reality is that I'm never going to have any political influence over my country. The only thing I can do of any influence is vote. That's it. So you may as well just stick with the philosophical idealist stuff. Okay. So in that sense, if we're going to already presuppose, like I think you should, that your ideal nation is nominally Christian, in the sense that I think an ideal nation should present itself as being Christian, right? And I think that actually is the expectation. So you've already got that established. The nation is Christian. And there is some kind of sense in which the people, the Volk, are a Christian people. That's not to say that there might be non-Christians there. There might be a lot of them. But there is some kind of sense in which that puts them a little bit outside the circle. Here in this country, we're Christian, right? So like there are countries that do this properly, like Poland might be an example. If you're a Muslim or an atheist in Poland, there is some sort of sense you're not quite fitting in. If I move to Saudi Arabia, there's a sense I'm kind of outside the circle a little here, right? If we assume that that's already true, then the state, I think, certainly does then have the right to do some wealth redistribution. Yeah. And to say, okay, well, look, we're a Christian nation. The people here are generally speaking Christian. This is, as a nation, we have a Christian identity. And because of the way of the modern world, the way that money works and everything, we have taxes, and we basically have automatic taxes. We just take the money out of you before you even receive it, unless you're like savages in America where you like do your own taxes or something. Okay, whatever. Just you have this complicated bureaucracy tax system. Then yeah, I think the government can be like, okay, well, we're going to tax the rich at a higher rate, and we're going to tax the poor at a lower rate, and we're going to take some of that money from the rich, and we're going to give that to the poor through means of social welfare, that kind of thing, housing, accommodation supplements, childcare payments, where you have a welfare system that just deposits money into your account, and then we use that funding also. We use that money that we've taken from the rich also just to create soup kitchens or that kind of thing. Absolutely, I think that's totally fine. And yeah, I'm totally. I think that's good. I think that's good. What about the state as it pertains to private property? That's a more complicated question. Can we abolish private property without bloodshed? Oof. I think history has shown that probably not. And do we want that? No, we don't. So, and bloodshed, I mean. So can the state make everything communist in the sense of abolishing private property and all that sort of thing? I just can't see that happening. I can't see that happening peaceably. So probably not. No. But if it could be done, or if we just created a state out of we bought an island and we all moved there and we just made this state. Do we get private property? Yeah, maybe. I don't know. But the thing is, I'm also very worried that I don't want anything to turn into Jonestown. Right? Look how that went. So everything has to be voluntary as well. Can't the state? Yeah, I just socialist communist states tend to come with totalitarian and tyrannical power and violence and that kind of thing and oppression, and we don't want any of that either. So it's tough. It's tricky. I'm not a politician. I study theology. I don't study politics anywhere near as much as I study theology. So I shouldn't. I don't know. But certainly, if I was to vote only on economics, so like forget about pro-life, pro-choice, obviously I'm pro-life, or things like that. Yeah, I'd be voting left. Yeah, I'd be voting like Democrat rather than Republican as it pertains to those issues. Certainly. Unfortunately, in basically all Western countries, there are no parties that are socially right and conservative and economically left. Unfortunately, it's very, very frustrating. And that's how I generally, that's how I do see Christianity. Is when it comes to these social issues, conservatives do tend to be correct about abortion or sexuality or whatnot. They tend to be wrong when it comes to money and wealth and those sorts of things. So, okay. Probably last thing to say, how rich is too rich? You're too rich if there's people in your circle who are in need. It's that simple. It's narcissistic to try and determine how rich is too rich without reference to other people. That's the whole point. We're not individualist. I'm not saying you're too rich if your income is above a set amount. No. It's just about the people. This is socialism. This is communalism. You're too rich if there are people in your orbit who are too poor and who you could help but aren't. It's that simple. All right? Certainly, if I meet a Christian who owns 3 houses, you know what I mean? I'm kind of raising a pretty big eyebrow there. Like, that's usually a pretty good indication that they failed to understand the New Testament at a fundamental level. Yeah. Okay. With that out of the way, I think we'll look at some final comments. If you have any final questions, chuck them in now, or forever hold your peace. If someone helps someone in need in their church financially and finds they squandered the money, say, on drugs, what should they do then? Why do people always go to this? It does sort of seem to suggest that when you hear poor, you think drug addiction. As if rich people don't do drugs. Should they continue helping financially? It's not an either or. It's not you either give them the money and they give it and they spend it on drugs, or you don't give them the money. There are other things that you could do. You could just buy them food. You could just, order them food deliveries, right? There's all kinds of stuff you could do. So it's not, you don't have to make it a binary like that. And like, you're a church, so if you find out a congregation member is like a drug addict, you're going to want to help them with the drug addiction as well, aren't you? It's going to leave them to rot in hell. In a hell of their own making, I mean. Like, they're going to leave them to just go through that on their own, are you? What do you mean by the poor? I mean people who are poor. Why are they poor? Homeless ministries say, do not give cash to the homeless. Are you 5 years old? When you hear poor people, do you think I just mean homeless beggars? Oh, that's poor people, right? Poor people are homeless beggars who are all addicted to meth. That's what I mean by poor people. No, I mean poor people. I mean people made in the image of God who are poor. What that means is they don't live comfortable lives. They don't live in luxury. And getting by week to week is done with difficulty. They have to think carefully about what they're going to spend their money on. If they fill up their car with gas, that means they won't have enough to eat. So they can't fill it up. They have to put just enough gas in the car so that they can get to where they need to go that week. Otherwise, they're screwed. It means that kind of thing. Now, that happens, by the way, believe it or not, to normal people, to people who aren't freaks and drug addicts and dumb people. As it pertains to homeless people, we should also be looking after them. They're also people. Homeless ministries say, do not give cash to the homeless. Okay, I've never given money to the homeless. I give them food. I ask them what they want. I ask them, what do you need? How can I help? Or I might say, I might be like, I'm about to go into the bakery. What do you want? You could do that. That's better. That's more human interaction anyway than just throwing them some coin or something. But you wouldn't even do that, apparently. Okay. Someone said, my church has consistently My church gave money to non people in poverty, and they consistently bought drugs with it. Then do better. Oh, that's Caleb. Caleb, I don't want to insult you. I'm getting too mean here. See, maybe Paul, maybe you're right. Maybe I'm getting a little sensitive. I don't know. No, I'm just trying to be fun, okay? Gosh, there needs to be a bit of fire, a bit of saltiness for it to be fun. Otherwise, this is boring, and you know it. Paul says, give me your thoughts. For a while, I've reflected and found that I actually want to be rich. Pray for Paul. Guys, everyone, please pray for Paul. Pray for the repose of Paul's. Pray for Paul. He says he wants to be rich. I actually want to be rich, but chiefly so that I can bless others on a massive scale. I get true pleasure from that. Okay, don't pray for Paul anymore. It's fine. He's okay. Don't pray for him anymore. Yeah, I mean, like, sure, like, yeah, is it good to earn a lot of money so that you can give to other people? Yeah, sure, but that's not what it means to be rich, right? To be rich is to have that money. To keep that money. I think I would assume that's like a standard intuitive way of understanding what it means to be rich. I think if you earn a lot of money, but it all just goes away, are you rich? I don't know. Yeah, but so long as you're also earning that money in a legit way, because, if you're the kind of guy who if you're a billionaire, it's like, there's no way that you can be a billionaire without being into some shady stuff. Like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just not possible for you to be a billionaire without you being a dick. Like, there's just no way, right? So that's yeah. Okay. River, what do you think of the Athanasian Creed? I agree with everything it has to say about the Trinity and God and Christology and matters of such things, and stuff like that. Yeah. It also wasn't written by Athanasius, and it's kind of just like a historical curiosity. But it does have good things to say about the Trinity and Christology and stuff like that. Paul says, I otherwise live with quite simple means. I can confirm I know where Paul lives. I've seen how this man lives. And he's not some kind of rich guy, so that's nice. Someone goes, so you're generous with your one friend? My Buddhist family does 100 times that. Look at how arrogant this... Dude! What the heck? You're generous with your one friend. My Buddhist family does 100 times that. Oh, okay. Good for you and your Buddhist family, man. I'm so happy for you. Good for you. Oh, good for you. Pat yourself on the back, buddy. You just earned your way to salvation. You just got your ticket to heaven. Okay, someone says, if the state punishes theft and the fathers believe that extreme wealth is theft, then state should punish theft even in the form of excess wealth. Yeah, I don't know. Do you think it's important to have policies that decrease wealth inequality, or should we only focus on meeting needs? Yes, I think that decreasing wealth inequality should actually be done as well. I'm not advocating for like some full-blown Pol Pot, like kill everyone in the middle class or something, but yeah, a little bit of that, sure. Donald Trump is a pious Christian. He owns a lot of stuff. Are you joking? Is that a joke? Tell me you're joking. Oh, good. He just said joke. Oh, thank goodness for that. Yeah, Donald Trump is a pious Christian. Yeah, sure. Okay, someone says, do you think a Christian could be faithful to Scripture and support an economic right policy on the grounds that it reduces poverty? If you truly think it reduces poverty, then yeah, sure. But like, come on. Thanks for the answer, River. I think that's pretty much the right approach. Okay. Paul says, I think many of the commentators' worries about the implications of your statements on ordinary Western lives do not understand the scale of greed and misery in that ancient wealth. Yeah, things are a lot greedier and miserable back then, and much more disparate with wealth. Oscar says, I mean, if you have a company and makes a lot of money but only keeps $3,000 a month, you still have a company you can sell. Is that rich? I don't know. This is just getting pedantic now. Truly, billionaires are a creation of crony capitalism. Yep. Paul says, I think many commentators' worries on the implications of your statements on Western life do not understand the scale of greed and misery in the ancient world that Christ was attacking. Sure. But are you implying there that these statements that I've been quoting from the fathers in scripture aren't as applicable to today? Yeah. Are you kidding? Donald Trump is a pious Christian, so much so that he had multiple wives following the virtues of King Solomon. Yeah, right? Yeah. I mean, obviously you can have obscene wealth and not be a sin. Solomon had, he was wealthy too. Yeah. This is your brain on that thing. Like, you know what I mean? Like that thing, that Republican, like MAGA hat, conservative Christian. Like the kind of guy who actually is sexist and actually is homophobic, like actually is a bigot, like that kind of person. Yeah. Yeah. Wait, he said you could be homophobic? Are you a liberal now? No. No. It is a sin to have same-sex practices and marriage and blah, 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 blah. Yeah. And you need to repent of it, yes. Can you be homophobic? You can, yes. It would be something like you see someone who's gay and you dehumanize them or think that they're subhuman or some kind of freak, or you would refuse to shake hands with them. They're like, they might have AIDS. Ugh. They're like untouchable. They're like some kind of, some kind of untouchable freak who doesn't deserve to be shown kindness to. Are there Christians who are like that? Heck, yeah, there are a lot of Christians like that. Is that a sin for them to be like that? It is indeed. Yes. Okay. Someone says, which system allows for the most free will to the most people? Who cares? Surely not government-run enforcement such as taxes through coercion. Who the heck cares? More freedom. Okay. Paul says, no, they are applicable. The commentators just don't appreciate the need for harsh measures and statements from Christ and the apostles in their context. Yeah, sure. Like certain basic senses of charity that even modern capitalist Christians take for granted were not the norm then. Julian the Apostate made an expanded welfare service to counter Christian influence. Interesting. Didn't know that. Okay. I think we're done here. We've gone for 2.5 hours. It's pretty long. And so, yeah. Okay, next week we're going to be looking at the flesh versus spirit dichotomy, how the early church were all Gnostics because they believe that there's a distinction between the flesh and the spirit, and that the flesh is lesser, corruptible, temporal, won't be resurrected, and that we'll have spiritual bodies and blah, blah, blah. So, which is explicitly taught in 1 Corinthians 15. But we'll get to that. So we'll talk about all that kind of stuff. So today's lesson, the early church were all godless commies. Next week, the early church were all Gnostics. Yeah, but because they had a flesh versus spirit dichotomy. So that'll be fun. So stay tuned. We're going to keep this on. This Forgotten Christianity series is going to get unhinged. I'm going to be mean to people in the comments and go crazy with everyone, and everyone's going to think I'm a liberal heretic and stuff, and that's just how it's going to be, because this is fun. I'm enjoying doing this. This is, yeah. So, okay. Yeah. I hope you've enjoyed the video. I hope you learned a bit from it. I hope it's made you think, maybe change your ways, that kind of stuff. So there you go. Final message: just love your neighbor. Make sure that his needs are being met, especially if he's in your church. Very important stuff. Very important stuff. Okay. All right. And let's link it to the gospel. It's linked to the gospel because Jesus, although he was rich, became poor to make many rich. There you go. So, like Jesus, we should do the same. Okay, well, thank you for watching. God bless you. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, click the bell, and stay tuned for the next video. See ya.